Yama, everyone. Yama is hello in Kamilaroi language. Firstly, I would like to thank Uncle for that beautiful welcome, Gary. That was mesmerising, and I do feel very comfortable now being on this land. So thank you for welcoming me. It's much appreciated. It actually gave me goosebumps. So it really connected. I'd like to thank Rochelle, Michael and Todd for inviting me here today to speak and to visit your beautiful country. I'm just moving the slide.
For you.
IT.
Thank you, Luca.
Thank you, Luca. Yeah. I'm Mark Champley. I'm a proud descendant of the Kamilaroi and Wiradjuri nations. They're the two largest nations within the state of New South Wales. Kamilaroi translates to no having. So traditionally, we never focused on material things. We shared what we had. We only used what we need. We tread lightly on Mother Earth. We look after each other, and we look after Mother Earth, and Mother Earth will look after us. At the moment, the Kamilaroi believe Mother Earth is angry and hurt because of years of neglect and exploitation. We need to stop, listen, and take action to heal Mother Earth. We need to do this so Mother Earth can continue to look after us. I was born in Sydney on Wongal country. Sydney comprises of 29 different clan groups, and they're located amongst three mighty rivers. We have the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean to the west, and Georges River to the south. To the east, we have the Pacific Ocean. So within those boundaries, we have 29 clans. The clan that covers Sydney's CBD is the Gadigal. Gadigal translates to grass tree people. Gal is the suffix for people, and Gadi is the grass tree plant. Prior to colonisation, the grass tree was prevalent throughout the city of Sydney. It was a very useful plant. The long stem was used for spears. The resin was used for glue. The seed pods were used for a cutting instrument. And the flower, the nectar, was used for a sweet tasting drink. I believe the Gadigal lived on paradise. They were peaceful, beautiful weather, ample food, and they had a freshwater stream that flowed through the Gadigal land down to the harbour. This freshwater stream sustained the Gadigal for thousands and thousands of years. Today, I would like to talk to you about our journey, our reconciliation journey, the impact of colonisation, and where we stand at the moment. Australia is made up of two distinct cultural groups. We have the Torres Strait Islanders and the Aboriginal people. Torres Strait Islanders are located to the north of the mainland of Australia, and Aboriginal people reside on the mainland and also in Tasmania. We're a very diverse people. We're made up of, Aboriginal people are made up of 250 language groups, all very different. I compare that to Europe. There's 44 countries that comprise of Europe, all with different languages, different cultures, different beliefs, different religions. The same could be said about our Aboriginal nations, all very different. This all changed on the 26th of January, 1788. That's 235 years ago. That's when the first fleet arrived to colonise Australia. It was justified through terra nullius, which is Latin for nobody lives here, no one's home, unoccupied. The first fleet comprised of 11 ships, 11 tall ships, 770 convicts, 556 crew and officers. The initial impact of the arrival of the first fleet was an epidemic of disease: smallpox, measles, influenza. Governor Arthur Phillip stated after 14 months of the arrival of the first fleet, the population of Greater Sydney, half had died. The exploitation and sexual abuse of Indigenous girls and women also brought an epidemic of venereal disease. As the colony grew, so did resistance. This is now called the Frontier Wars. This war lasted 140 years, the longest war in Australia's history. Aboriginal people were taken from their homelands, placed into missions and reserves, and their culture and their traditions taken from them. The government also tried to break the Aboriginal culture and remove Aboriginal people from existence. This was through the assimilation policy led by the Aboriginal Protection Board, which meant the authorities could take Aboriginal children from their families and from their communities. This group are now called the Stolen Generations. The assimilation policy existed for 60 years. And sadly, the trauma of that is still relevant and very painful to this day. Aboriginal people make up approximately 3% of the Australian population. So we don't take up a lot of space. However, we make up 30% of people that are incarcerated, and that increases in our youth. If you are an Aboriginal person, you're 6 times likely to commit suicide. 95% of all Aboriginal people have had some impact with suicide. 35% of children in out-of-home care are Aboriginal children. even though we make up 3% of the population. An Aboriginal person born today is more likely to be incarcerated than go to university. And sadly, there's a blind spot. Many Australians are totally unaware of this history. It wasn't taught in the curriculum. The history in the curriculum, Australia's history started with the arrival of Captain Cook. And would you believe 94% of Australians today claim they have never met an Aboriginal person. So at least the people here today can say that they have. To create change, in the year 2000, a group of Aboriginal people decided to launch a protest march. That was across Sydney Harbour Bridge. It was the same year of the 2000 Olympic Games, so there was a lot of attention on Sydney and Australia at that time. I think this was a call out to the world that we need your help and we need your support. One of the organisers is a friend of mine, Shelley Rays, and Shelley was telling me that they had no idea how many people were going to turn up to support this event. They were actually hoping there'd be a few hundred. On the day, 250,000 people arrived to walk across Sydney Harbour Bridge in protest and in reconciliation to change things for our First Nations people. This, at the time, was the biggest demonstration in Australia's history. The following week, in Brisbane, Queensland, 80,000 people walked over the bridge. And Melbourne, the sporting capital of Australia, who always likes to outdo Sydney, the following week, 300,000 people walked across the bridge to support Aboriginal people. As a direct result of this, the following year, in 2021, Reconciliation Australia was formed. This is now the peak body in Australia to support reconciliation. They've done some wonderful things, including over 1,000 organisations within Australia. Some of them are very big organisations like Qantas, and the organisation I work for, Transport for New South Wales, have reconciliation action plans. So that's a framework on the actions that this organisation is going to take to close the gap between non-Aboriginal people and Aboriginal people, to make more equity and change people's lives. I'd like you to reflect on our journey in Australia with the journey here in Canada, to see what similarities exist, and I'm sure there are many. I'd like to share with you now some of the projects that I've worked on that I'm very passionate about, that I was driven to support reconciliation in my country. In 2012, I was moved into a senior role at Sydney Ferries. Sydney Ferries is quite iconic. It's one of the brands most people know about Australia. It's the ferries in Sydney. At the time, we only had 2% of Aboriginal employment. This was a concern to me. So what I did, I organised a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that worked at the ferries. We came together, we called the group Bungaree Maru. Bungaree was an Aboriginal man that sailed around or circumnavigated Australia with Matthew Flinders in the year 1801 to 1803. And Maru is a local word for navigate. So Bungaree Maru. This group was the first time an Aboriginal group or Torres Strait Islander group was formed within Sydney Ferries, but it did amazing things. We came together. Our aim was to increase Aboriginal employment, increase cultural awareness, and make Sydney Ferries a safe place for Aboriginal people. And I know we obtained that. The following year in 2013, I was able, and our group were able to influence our employer and the state government for Sydney Ferries to fly the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag on our ferries for the very first time during NAIDOC week. That was a moment I was extremely proud, and I was very touched because my family and my late mum was there to see that. And that was a significant change. Symbolism is very powerful. When Aboriginal people see a sign like that, they see that as a safe place. At the same time, in parallel, Sydney Ferries were promoting some opportunities for maritime trainees. So what I did, I went out to community within Sydney. I went to Redfern and La Perouse. They're highly populated Indigenous suburbs, and I held information sessions, basically finding out if there were any interested parties, any young Aboriginal men or women that wanted to join Sydney Ferries. And I found there was a lot of interest. I found that this group of people were very keen to start work. The thing was, you didn't need any experience, just the passion to join the maritime industry. So what we did, our group, Bungaree Maru, we helped everyone with their CVs, with their cover letters. We did mock interviews. But there was one young man that connected with me, and he shared with me his story. He'd been unemployed for 12 months. And he revealed the reason why he left his previous employer, because there was severe racism towards him. So much so, he attempted suicide. That is very common. This young man, however, wanted to rejoin the workforce. He had a partner and they just found out that she was pregnant with her first child. So he wanted to be a role model. So I was really hoping he was successful. He then shared this story with me. He went through the whole recruitment process, and then he was invited to attend an interview at Circular Quay, where the Sydney Ferries offices were located at the time. He told me when he arrived down there, it was a beautiful sunny day. It was extremely busy. He said there were people everywhere. And then he realised he had never been to Circular Quay since he was a child. And as he stood there watching, that negative voice started to talk to him, saying, "What are you doing here? You're not good enough for this. You're wasting everyone's time." He saw crowd control, people trying their best to usher people around onto the ferries. He saw the captains walk around tall with their epaulets, and all of a sudden he started to sweat. He was saying to himself, "I can't do this." He said he was about to turn away and walk away. All of a sudden he looked up and he saw the Manly ferry berthing at Circular Quay, flying the Aboriginal flag. All of a sudden, all of that anxiety and that negative voice went away. His ancestors were talking to him, saying, "You are good enough. You do belong here, and we're with you." He went in for the interview. He nailed it. And this year, he's celebrating 10 years service at Sydney Ferries, which is wonderful. Out of the other people that applied, I'm really proud to say 5 Aboriginal young men and women secured employment out of 8. So that proved to me that if you put the effort in, you make a safe place, that you will succeed. In 2016, December 2016, the New South Wales government tabled the unfinished business report. This was focused on the stolen generations. There were over 30 recommendations, and recommendation 11, 12 and 13 focused on healing. In 2017, Transport for New South Wales, Sydney Trains and New South Wales Trainlink asked me if I would represent them to meet with the Department of Aboriginal Affairs and the Stolen Gen organisations, and I was thrilled to do that. I was going through some grieving at the same time. I'd only just lost my mum, and as I always believe our ancestral spirits are guiding us, so I think that was part of my own healing. And I should share with you today, this tie I'm wearing, I only wear on special occasions. It was handmade by my late mum, and whenever I wear it, I feel like she's here with me. So my mum's is here with me, supporting me today. When I met the Stolen Gen survivors, I walked into the room and I realised that they were about the same age as my mum. And I said that to them. And I said how proud she would be that I'm here to support them with their healing. I listened to what they wanted. And when we broke for morning tea, I'll never forget the kindness and caring that these people who were taken when they were children, disconnected from their families and communities, put into institutions, used as servants, came up to me, hugged me, and said, "We understand what you're going through, son. We're here to support you." So what we organised was a site visit. I found out very quickly the most significant site for the Stolen Gen survivors are train stations. The main reason was when the children were taken from their homes, all schools, many of these children were just taken straight from school, placed on a train. A lot of times it was all their family, but all the siblings were taken at once, placed on a train. Many of them had never been on a train before. And some of these train trips were many hours. They would travel to Central Station in Sydney, Platform 1. That was the most significant location for the Stolen Gen survivors. And the main reason was the train journey for many of them was an adventure. But when they arrived at Platform 1, that's when the trauma started, because the policy was to separate siblings. They wanted to break the language. So the children, the siblings, were sent to different institutions throughout New South Wales. Many never saw each other again. Many didn't survive. So the Stolen Gen basically said, we would want a memorial plaque on Central Station Platform 1. We did a site visit and they picked the site. This is where we want it. They also identified 9 regional stations which were of significance, and they wanted plaques there. And I led that project. I've got to tell you, it was quite difficult dealing with bureaucracy. I met with New South Wales Heritage and I said, the Stolen Gen want their memorial plaque here. They said, that can't happen. You can have it over here, but not here. And I said, that's not good enough. You've got all these other plaques all around the station. And I said, if we don't put this plaque where the Stolen Gen wanted, we're not actually supporting their healing, we're actually adding to their trauma. So what we did, we had the plaque made, and the plaque itself, there's 4 different paintings, and they're from the 4 stolen gen organisations. So the top one's from Burnaby Home, the next one's from Cootamundra Girls Home, then Kinchela Boys Home, which was infamous. Some terrible things happened there. And the bottom one's from New South Wales ACT Stolen Gen Organisation. So the paintings were done by survivors from those various homes. But when you look at the paintings, they look like they were done through by children. But in fact, they were done by people well in their 80s, but through the lens of when they were children. So that was a memory for them of when they were taken. When we had the plaque made up, and I was still trying to organise the installation where they wanted, we had a formal unveiling. We had over 300 stolen gen survivors and their descendants at Central Station. A very moving ceremony. But because it wasn't installed at the time, we just showcased the plaque. But what we did, we organised a cabinet, and we placed the plaque in the cabinet, and we would bring it out every morning. And what I'm really proud of, we had a roster of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people that volunteered to bring that cabinet out every morning and take that cabinet back in the afternoon. It took me about 6 months to get the installation approved, and all it was just going to the top. And they understood the importance of this. So now the memorial plaque is at Central Station, exactly where the stolen gen wanted. And every year we invite the stolen gen back, and we all come together as part of their healing. And next year we're starting phase 2, which will be a statue on platform 1, and in the waiting room we'll be telling their stories as well. So this is all contributing to their healing. The regional stations, we have plaques in every regional station that they wanted. The last station that was unveiled was on the 9th of June 2022. It was at Burke Station. Burke is very remote. It's far west New South Wales. When I went out there, I've established there were 13 families still living in Burke who were had a connection with being taken from Burke and put on the Burke train. So I actually had small replicas made for the 13 families. When we handed those plaques out, it was just so powerful. When the main plaque was just about to be unveiled by Uncle Peter Knight, I'll never forget it. It was freezing cold. I was actually shivering, and it was so quiet. It was so peaceful. There would have been over 200 people there from Burke. It was a big roll-up. As soon as Uncle Peter Knight pulled away the flag and showcased the memorial plaque, all these black cockatoos came screeching over us, loud in a way like saying, we support this, this is what's happening here. And then I found out later that the black cockatoo is their totem out there. So it was extremely powerful. As I said earlier, I worked for Sydney Ferries for many years. I left the ferries in December 2015. I thought I had done enough there. They employ about 660 people, and I moved on to transport, where at the time there was, if you included contractors, it was about 40,000 people. So I just thought there was more I could do for our people. In 2016, it was announced that the Lady Northcote was going to be retired. It's a beautiful vessel, double-ended vessel, carries 800 passengers. I've actually worked on this vessel, so I know it quite well. And I knew at the time that this was being retired prematurely. A lot of these vessels, when they're retired, they're purchased and used for scrap. So they're just broken up. There's so much history with this vessel. This first came into service in 1975. Worked 2 years moving people from Circular Quay to Manly, one of our most popular routes, and carried during that time over 2 million passengers, 44 years. At the same time that they announced the retirement, again, the ancestors placing me in the right spot, I was shadowing a DepSec for my own development. And I said to this DepSec, who I had his ear, said, can we do something different with this Lady Northcote? Instead of, selling it and being used for scrap, why don't we look at giving it to Tribal Warrior, which is the only maritime charity organisation in Australia, and it's located in Sydney. They have, at the time, they had 2 vessels, quite small. Their largest vessel would carry close to 200 people. They did cultural tours. They also did a lot of training, maritime training on the vessel. And the DepSec thought it was a great idea. I introduced the DepSec to the CEO of Tribal Warrior, Uncle Shane Phillips, and I know that they had discussions. But at the time, it just wasn't right. At the time, we didn't have a reconciliation action plan, and it was put in the too hard basket, even though it was a great idea. 2017, the Lady Northcote was retired. Many people protest, especially local people that would catch the ferries, not wanting the ferry to be retired. And people get connected with it. If you catch a ferry for many, many years, you feel some connection with it. So there was a lot of resentment towards the government retiring this vessel, but it was retired. And sadly, it was just tied up in Sydney. 2021, during COVID, I'll go back a step. In 2019, I was part of Transport. The chair of that was the Secretary of Transport, a guy called Rod Staples. He led our advisory team, and a lovely guy, but a real advocate for Aboriginal people as well. So we launched that RAP in 2018. 2019, we launched that RAP, but it gave us some commitments, and I've got the document here. This is the RAP. The artwork signifies our song lines, how our ancestors would travel around this ancient land, sharing stories, sharing knowledge, singing, celebrating, ceremony. So it's extremely important. And one thing I'm really proud of, there's 3 case studies on this document, and 2 out of the three case studies are my work. So something I'm extremely proud of. After launching that RAP, things had changed. A lot of organisations with RAPs find it quite difficult on what to do. In 2021, I was at home, working from home. It was COVID. I got up to stretch my legs. As I was walking through the house, one of my pet hates is leaving the TV on. And again, the ancestral spirits putting me in the right place. I went to turn the TV off, and there was a news flash. But there was a tugboat towing the Lady Northcote out of Sydney Harbour. They were taking it up to Newcastle for sale. I went straight back onto my laptop, and I sent the Secretary of Transport an email giving him all the background of what happened in 2016 and my discussion with the then DepSec, and asked if he would revisit that idea. I'm proud to say he embraced it. the contracts team, I've worked with them closely, contacted Tribal Warrior. They had to put a proposal in, which they did. I had a phone call from the contracts team, and they said, Mark, we've come up with this. We just want to pass it by you before we contact Tribal Warrior and Uncle Shane. And they said, well, we're going to gift the Lady Northcott to Tribal Warrior for $1, but to help them get the ferry back into survey, we're going to give them $300,000. They said, how do you think they will react? I said, when you tell Uncle Shane, make sure you tell him that he's sitting down, because he will be shocked. And thankfully, that all happened. It was something that I'm extremely proud of. I organised a group of retired ferry, well, current and retired ferry workers, skippers, engineers, trainers, would all go up to Newcastle on a regular basis to support the Tribal Warrior staff in bringing this ferry back into survey. So it was a real community effort. I am really proud that when the ferry was due to come back to Sydney, because it was only in partial survey, they couldn't bring back any passengers, only crew. But I was really excited to be in Sydney when it arrived. Tribal Warrior rang me up and said, Mark, to thank you for what you have done, we would like you to be part of the crew to bring the Lady Northcott from Newcastle back to Sydney under its own steam, keeping in mind it was towed out of Sydney. And I jumped at the opportunity. When we left Newcastle, people were waving. When we went out to sea, it was about, from memory, about a 5-hour journey down. There was a lot of rough weather, and I don't like rough weather. But I must admit, it was like we were in a cone, because it was just so peaceful all the way down. I'll never forget when we came into Sydney Harbour, and if you ever in your life get an opportunity to enter Sydney Harbour, it is something extremely special. Coming into Sydney Harbour, it was just wonderful, very emotional. We all had tears on the vessel. But then whenever we passed the ferry, the first ferries we passed were the Manly ferries. They all sounded their horns to say, you know, welcome home. This happened all the way along as we travelled through the harbour. I have found out later that all the staff at the ferries went onto the wharves, to the end of the wharves, and they were all clapping, welcoming the ferry back. When we came into Blackwattle Bay, all the Tribal Warrior and a lot of the local community were there and crying and cheering. And so all of a sudden, this 800-seat ferry, this beautiful ferry, flies the Aboriginal flag, is owned by an Aboriginal organisation. And they've done some great things already. They've trained a number of Aboriginal young men and women in maritime skills there. And some of them are now working on Sydney Harbour on the Manly Fast Ferry. So it's changing lives. They've used the ferry for cultural tours, and now they're negotiating with the government to get a ferry run. On the 25th of January, it's funny, that day before Australia Day, many Australians, and this is both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, call Australia Day Invasion Day, because that's the day the first fleet arrived. And it's not a day many people feel comfortable in celebrating. But on the 25th, the day before Australia Day, we had the official launch of the, it's now called the Wirrawee Lady Northcott. Wirrawee is, in the traditional local language, girl or woman. And what I'm really proud of, and I think this tells a lot about the respect of our culture, they actually sought out the descendant of Lady Northcott, who was the wife of an Australian governor, to ask for their permission to dual name the boat. And they obtained that permission. So now the vessel's called Wirrawee, Lady Northcott, and that vessel is changing lives. And I really feel it's changing the heart of Sydney. Whenever you see that vessel, people take photos. It's something really powerful. And there's so much ahead of that vessel in the future. The next thing I wanted to talk about, which I really believe is supporting reconciliation in my country. As I work for Transport for New South Wales, we found that we had quite a lot of people, quite a lot of Aboriginal people working in the entrance space. So to increase that, what we did, we started a program called the Aboriginal Career Development and Mentor Program. It was piloted in 2016. We had 16 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women and 16 senior executives come together in a very safe environment. We ran the course or the program in partnership with University of New South Wales. We had Uncle Mark Rose, who's one of the most senior Aboriginal academics in Australia, there as well. After the program had finished, it was very evident that this program not only benefited the mentees, but actually the mentors got more out of the program than the mentees. And what I said before, with 94% of Australians not ever meeting an Aboriginal person, all of these executives had never met an Aboriginal person. So what I call it, it's removing the eggshells, because a lot of Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people want to connect, but they don't know how. There's that fear that they might offend somebody. But in this safe environment, with a very much a cultural lens, we all came together in a yarning circle, and we went around the room asking, why are you here? What do you want to get out of it? And the mentors, basically, the mentors wanted to contribute, but they also wanted to learn. And that's what happened. So all of a sudden, this mentoring program became a reverse mentoring program, and it's evolved. I'm managing this program now. In February next year, we'll be having our 7th cohort. It's become that popular. We've had to form an alumni. So we have an alumni, which was the first alumni ever in transport, which is remarkable. I feel that we're changing the heart of transport, the DNA of transport. It's different now because of this program. It's interesting because the senior executives leave the program and they take the knowledge and the confidence that they've got from their mentee back into their own workforce. And we're all over New South Wales. We cover many, many different organisations and business within transport. The program was so well received. The Public Service Commissioner in the annual report on the state of the public service had it as a case study, and this went out to all the public service. And in 2021, the Department of Education and the Department of Community and Justice contacted me to learn about the program. And what I'm really pleased about, in 2022, both organisations replicated the same program, and they invited me to come along as an observer. And I can tell you the outcome was exactly the same. Very, very powerful. I've got a case study here. One of the mentors contacted me and said, I've been talking to my mentee, and it was interesting. The mentor was in charge of all regional assets. It was a big portfolio of assets. His mentee was worked on track and civil on the trains. So if you see people working on the trains when the trains stop, he was working in that field. he was able to tell his mentor the importance of symbols for Aboriginal people. So he rang me up and he said, Mark, I've got all these water tankers all over New South Wales, and it costs the organisation $15,000 to paint a water tanker orange. He said, what I've learned, I would like to engage an Aboriginal or Aboriginal artists from the various locations throughout New South Wales where we have these water tankers and wrap them in their artwork to tell the story of their lands. And I said, that's a great idea. So we had a meeting with his team, and one of his team members said, before we start that, it's a great idea, but just coming up, we have a vehicle ferry on the Clarence River. Lawrence on the ferry in New South Wales, so it's used a lot. I contacted a local Aboriginal artist who loved the idea, and as you can see on that picture there, that's the Aboriginal artwork wrapped around this vehicle ferry. I was there for the unveiling, and the story is there's three clans around, it escapes me at the moment, will come to me. Three clans would share this river. So the artwork tells about those three countries, these three clan groups, and how they would share the river, all come together. And we had representations, we had elders from all three at the unveiling. The funniest thing was, I work at transport, I should know my way around. I actually parked on the wrong side. So I caught the ferry over by foot, and when we finished the unveiling and the ceremony, I actually hopped on the vehicle ferry to go back to my car, and the deckhand came up to me and said, I was listening to that story about that artwork. That was so beautiful. He said, I'm not an Indigenous person, but I would love to share that story. And he placed on the ferry so I can remember it and I can tell my customers about it. I said, I can sure organise that, which I did. But that's what I wanted to say to you. That's reconciliation. You know, to have a non-Indigenous person wanting to tell that story, wanting to share that story. Now, after that, we're able to wrap water tankers all throughout New South Wales. This is just one photo of one of the water tankers with the artist there as well. But can you imagine that water tanker travelling through regional New South Wales, and you're a young Aboriginal child and you see that? Extremely powerful. The next case study I wanted to tell you, and I should mention that I'm talking a lot about the mentors and what they get out of the program. Cohort 4, which these two people were through, the program goes for just over 3 months. Within those 3 months of cohort 4, when we all came back together for a reflection session, 50% of the mentees had moved into more senior roles. Remarkable, remarkable. Overall, at least a third move into more senior roles within that 3 months period. But it's unbelievable results because there's a real focus, and they get the confidence that they can step outside their comfort zone. I wanted to share this with you because the mentee here, the bus driver, but had so much cultural knowledge. Whenever the bus company wanted to celebrate Reconciliation Week or NAIDOC Week or Sorry Day, they would ask him to come out and talk about culture, share that. To be honest, at the time, it was a bit of tokenism, but after that was finished, he'd go back to drive his bus. It was just such a waste of talent. So I encouraged him to be part of the program because he was concerned about his career because buses had been earmarked for privatisation. So he wasn't sure where he would end up. I knew there was so much more he could give. Nothing wrong with being a bus driver, but he was definitely should be somewhere else. I placed him with his mentor, and we've got a group of people with places, and that's the magic. You need to make sure you place the right person with the right person. It's like speed dating in a way. But with this, I placed Scott with the most senior legal person in transport. She admitted that she had never met an Aboriginal person, and she described herself as a sixth generation white privileged Australian. When they got together, it was like a match made in heaven. They really got along, and they both wanted it to work. Christine actually spent a day on his bus just to see what his life. She even went out to his mob in West Wyalong to meet his mob out there, which she had never met an Aboriginal community before. And she was able to build confidence in Scott that I knew I could see, but she was able to get that out. This was last year, 2022. Christine invited myself and Scott to a launch. She actually wrote a short story about her journey and how the program had opened up her eyes to Aboriginal people and what a beautiful culture it is, and how she would recommend all Australians to unite, come together and embrace this beautiful ancient culture, which is remarkable. Scott, I can tell you last year, the buses were privatised. Scott left the buses. He's now working for an organisation in HR, where he's working. Last year, he was able to secure $2 million of procurement for Aboriginal businesses. He also delivers cultural awareness training, and 500 people attended that last year. And so he's no longer driving a bus, but he's making a huge change for our people. And again, it's because he attended this course and he contributes his success to this, which is remarkable. On the crossroads, a long way in Australia, but on the 4th of October this year, we have a referendum. The referendum is and also for our First Nations people to be acknowledged in our Constitution. Our Constitution was established in 1901. There's no mention of First Nations people in that document. I honestly thought that this would be a shoo-in. I thought in today, many Australians would want this to happen. There's a lot of money being spent to close the gap, but it's not working. This way, Aboriginal people will be able to tell what they need. And as I said before, we're so diverse. It's not one size fits all. It's very, very different all over Australia. We've had 44 referendums in Australia so far in its history, and
You should have audio now.
Yeah. So, as I said, we're definitely at the crossroads. That referendum in 1967, that was bipartisan. This one's not. It's become very political. We had, I had that slide up there. That's the Uluru Statement of the Heart. In 2017, we had a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders travel throughout the nation, throughout Australia and the Torres Strait, and it was called the Dialogues. It was actually to get feedback on what they wanted. In 2017, 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders met at Uluru, a very sacred site, and they came up with the Uluru Statement of the Heart. There's only 44 words in the Uluru Statement of the Heart. That's a very giving document to try and unite our country, but ultimately it's about having a voice. So that's where our current Prime Minister called for this referendum. Sadly, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of people that are scared, and I'm really disappointed to say at the moment the No campaign has more people voting No than yes. So I'm concerned what the outcome is, but there's still some time left. So I'm hoping that people will change their minds and we get the vote up, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to vote no. It really doesn't. So that's the situation at the moment. There's been a lot of cultural load for my people. There's a lot of people that have been asking about the history. As I said, many Australians don't know the history. There's such blind spots out there. So, but there are still a lot of Australians that are supporting us, and I'm hoping that we will succeed. Okay, I did have a video to show you. It was really moving, but unfortunately, I'm all out of battery. But I'll share it with Rochelle, and if you'd like to see it, I'm sure she'll pass it on and share it with you. But so that's our reconciliation journey, and that's my involvement. It's only small, but I think, you know, for one person, sometimes I punch above my weight, and I call myself a bridge builder. I'm not an engineer or an architect, but I build bridges through storytelling and through truth telling, and that can be extremely powerful. So I'd just like to thank you for your time, and there's no word in any Aboriginal languages to say goodbye. So I'll say I look forward to seeing you later. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mark, for your words, your sharings, really deeply appreciated. We do have some time for questions. But before we go into questions, I want to make sure that we present you with our thanks. So Michael, if you can give our thanks, and then we'll go into questions, and then we can continue to have more conversation.
Mark, thanks so much for all the work that you do, clearly with a lot of love and perseverance. And thanks so much for sharing that with us on your visit here. So we have just a few things for you that I hope you'll appreciate. So a notebook, a journal, that was the cover of a Sasquatch was designed by Francis Horn Sr., who identifies as Coast Salish, a local Indigenous artist. A poster by a Métis artist named Christy Belcourt. And I know you've got a love for the water. Water is life. And this design, as well as others by Christy Belcourt, have been used in a lot of movements for land defense and water protection. And lastly, I was thinking about this as you were talking about the ancestors. This is a pin, and it's got a motif on it that's sort of known as the Coast Salish eye. So it would be used by a lot of nations around here. And it's the eye of the ancestor, watching over and protecting, but also a reminder that you're being watched, and so to continue to live in a good way and to honor the ancestors. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's it's very kind of you and everybody, and I'll cherish this. I can see a place on my wall where that's going to be framed already.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing the our way, just part of our way of saying thank you to you, Mark. We'll go to questions from the room, and Emily, maybe you'll also text me if there's some questions from the audience.
I was especially earlier this week, and Elvin mentioned that in 1993 there was the 95 a referendum in Canada, and right after the referendum, it's off radar again. But I did have a thought about that referendum. The problem I saw was the Prime Minister back then tried to get everybody to say yes to 5 issues. And I believe if we were to narrow it down to 1 issue with 2 people, I believe it might pass. But that's just but the question I had was, is there anything that we can do as an international audience to help that? Like the messaging or whatever?
Yeah, Gary, definitely. I'm sure, just even on social media, there is a website that's promoting yes, and you can look that up, and you can pledge your support through that portal. And I know that international support would be extremely well received, and it's interesting, Gary, because I know already there are a number of countries that do have a voice to Parliament. One is Canada, one is Finland, Sweden, New Zealand, Norway, I believe. So there are countries out there that already have what we're asking for. So, but yeah, I've been talking about this to a lot of workers within transport, especially frontline workers, because I realise that cultural load is affecting a lot of our people. When I spoke to 2 train staff, so they work on train stations in Newcastle, and they pulled me aside and they said, Mark, we don't go in the mess rooms anymore. It's just too toxic. There's some rednecks around. They're misguided, but we can't handle it anymore. So it's affecting many of our people. But I'm sure, Gary, when people hear support, and I'll be sharing that when I go back to say that we've got the support of the First Nations Canadians as well, and all Canadians, because it's just the right thing to do. It's interesting because the No campaigns just running with fear. That's all it is, and but there's nothing to be scared of. It's disappointing it's come to that, but it's political. That's all. Ultimately, I think that some of the politics on the opposition side, they're not looking at the effects for our First Nations people. They're looking at just to have an argument with the government to say, no, we don't agree with them, and that's extremely sad.
Being in the Constitution is extremely important. So, Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution recognizing the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, Indigenous peoples within this territory of Canada is certainly good for many of us.
I was going to ask the room, what I discussed, did you see many similarities with First Nations Canadians? Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a strong connection between our peoples. Yeah.
Especially like the mental health stuff that you were talking about with suicide and stuff, that's
Yeah.
unfortunately very relatable over here as well.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do you find that more remote Australian communities have less rates of suicide? Because that's what we've found here, is that more First Nation communities that have more connection with their communities.
Yeah.
Mostly out of the nature of being remote and out of
Yeah.
colonized nation. Do you find those kind of relationships as well?
That's a very, very good point. And interestingly, I think Parada, I think there's probably more in the remote areas, which is surprising. But there's a real lack of no hope. This was about 3 years ago. There was a remote, within a space of 3 months, there were, I think, about 5 suicides of young people. And sadly, the youngest was 10 years of age, which is just tragic. But the feeling is that, and I've spoken to people from these communities, and they say that what it is, it's that the loss of culture, the loss of connection with land, and they want to turn it around. And this is where the voice to Parliament, they can, and as I said, it's different everywhere, but they can tell government what they need, the tools they need to make change. And but ultimately, a lot of that in rural areas, it's just that the disconnection from culture. And it's interesting. There's there's the word suicide isn't in any Indigenous language. So, and that tells me that there was no suicide prior to colonisation.
Yeah.
So but it's definitely a cry for help.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it wasn't so much, definitely not the remote communities, it's the ones that have the cultural connection.
Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was like a really insightful talk. What kind of struck out to me was that the reverse mentoring program, and also your friend who was about struggling to get like during company events. It kind of just reminds me of, time and time again, First Nation communities, BIPOC people often get like hooked into a lot of these initiatives, and it takes a toll of the burden on the community. And so I wondered if you had ever, like in your conversations with African people, come across this as like a team, and what can we do in our institutions to support First Nations people that they can still have faith to tell their story and have a voice, but also not the
Yeah, that's you're exactly right. That is an issue. When I was in transport in their learning and development team, which was over 200 people, I was the only Indigenous person, and it seemed like everyone came to me, and it was on top of my normal duties, and it was tiring because I'm proud of my culture. But I never mentioned, but I also have 9 children, so it's a busy life. So, yeah. So but it does. I was sharing this with Michael and Rochelle the other day that I met an old school friend about 10 years ago, and I hadn't seen him since school, and he said, "Oh, are you married?" I said, "Yeah." I asked him that he wasn't. He said, "Do you have children?" I said, "Yeah, I've got 9. And he was blown away. He said, "Wow." And he asked me a question that no one's ever asked me. He said, "How do you find fatherhood?" And I thought for a while. I said, "Well, it's funny, I don't really feel like a father. I feel more like a referee." And that's what it's like. So, but I, in regards to the cultural load, it depends on the individual. So I know that there's been some change. So we, in Australia, you can do an acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country. The welcome can only be done by an elder of that land and or a knowledge holder of that land, where an acknowledgement is a spiritual gesture to the ancient tribes that walked through and cared for the lands for thousands of years. So we're encouraging to share that. You know, don't just ask, you know, for an Aboriginal person to perform an acknowledgement of country, but you know, and most Aboriginal people would prefer a non-Aboriginal person to do it because that's part of reconciliation. I did want to share this with you, and I forgot to mention it, but I think it's quite powerful. I tell people, you know, I said that colonisation started 235 years ago with the arrival of the first fleet. Now, if you imagine a clock face, and on that clock face, every minute, instead of representing a minute, represents 1,000 years. Now that clock, if you look at that, the first fleet arrived 14 seconds ago. But First Nations people in Australia have been caring for, nurturing, looking after the land for more than an hour. And I think that's quite powerful. And it's interesting because now I think our culture was, you know, they did their best to really eradicate our culture. But now they're calling on us. They realise that the cultural burning, for example, how we used to do that. We did that thousands of years. And so now there's more of an understanding. And our native foods, like, you know, all our native foods, it's there, but no one harvests it. So there's things that are happening now, but and I think, you know, I long for the time where Australians embrace our culture, because when I say that, you know, me as a person, I don't want to take away the last 235 years. I don't want to do that. It's happened. But I want to give you 65,000 years of culture. And I think that's quite a powerful statement. And I think, you know, really all Australians should unite and combine each other and live together in peace and harmony. Just for me, just makes so much sense.
I think the mentorship programs that you've had throughout your career, and been part of, you know, in small places and then on a bigger scale, I think that has been a key theme that I see in your work. And you know, that mentorship is so critical in, you know, in public sector, in industry, in education context. We're just so thankful for your work and the learnings that we can have from you.
I think what my vision, my dream, Rochelle, is that the reverse mentoring that's been so successful in the public service, I'd love it to move into the private sector. And me now having this Churchill Fellowship, it will open a few doors. So when I go back to Australia, I'll be knocking on some of these corporates about this program and about starting something off, and I feel very comfortable with that. So,
recognizing that our official time is over, but we do have space in another room, but it seems as though nobody's coming in here, so we can continue to dialogue. But I actually also wanted to share with you online and in this room the gift that Mark has given to us for thanks of us sort of helping host, not hosting, some work by an artist.
Trevor Eastwood, and Trevor and his family are quite famous artists in Australia, and he sent me an email this morning to say how proud he is that this is going to be on display at this university. And he even said that that might be an excuse to get a plane ticket over.
So, the circles represented the gatherings of people in conversation with each other to learn. The dots in the center, from what Mark shared with us, yesterday, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? I think it was 2 days ago. Represents the knowledge, and then the lines across being the song lines for communication. Of the knowledge and journey. So, Mark, really, thank you so much for the sharings here and this wonderful gift. And I've already spoken with the department chair, and he's going to help us frame this and place this in the department. So, really, thank you. I think I received a text from Emily, but now my texting isn't working. She's been monitoring things online. There were no questions when her last text came through to me, but just lots of thanks.
Yes, lots of thanks.
I hope that's still the case, Emily.
Yes, just checking the chat here. Just lots of questions, lots of comments here. Just to express our thanks to Mark.
Thank you.
I wanted to share with everyone, I've felt so welcomed here. Everyone has been so kind, and I do feel part of the furniture, and I can confirm that because yesterday I went for a walk around the campus and someone pulled me up and asked me for